As a woman who's been in the Libertarian Party for 7 years, I promise the patriarchy is alive and kicking. This is an area the Libertarian Party is falling so hard at. No, the patriarchy is dead, and so is feminism. The whole reason feminism existed was to smash the patriarchy and fight for equality among women and men. But that's not what modern feminists are doing. Instead, they are fighting tooth and nail to pin 100% of the blame on men and absolve women of 100% responsibility for their own individual life choices and the way they treat other people. There is no system in America today that is disproportionately disparaging women compared to men. Men are still the only ones who have to register for the draft. In fact, when feminism first came about and women were fighting for their rights to vote, most women wanted nothing to do with feminism because in order to vote back then, you also had to register for the draft. But instead of getting rid of the draft altogether, we just gave women a special exemption. This is why I think there's actually a solid argument to be made that in practice, feminism was never about equality because it only got popular as long as it gave women special treatment and special exemptions from expectations that men have always been held to and expected to live up to. There is a solid case to be made that feminism overall was never about equality when it came to practice. It was only about equality in theory. Another good example of this is the prison population. Leftists all over the internet like to remind everybody that the 1360 crime statistic is flawed. Why? Because the prison system was built on a foundation of exploiting a loophole in the 13th Amendment, which allows you to keep slaves so long as they have been convicted of a crime. But yet, feminists and leftists always bring up the fact that men commit a disproportionate amount of crime, failing to realize that women are often getting reduced sentences for the same crimes, especially violent crimes and sex offenders. Women by far outpace men in terms of unaliving children. And that's not just mothers, that's women overall. 71% of children killed by a single parent aren't killed by single mothers, and that's 60% more likely to happen to young boys. And despite all that, women only make up about 10% of the U.S. prison population. While libertarians frequently like to bring up the fact that our prison population is ridiculously high for a so-called land of the free, we never want to touch on the blatant sexism at play here. And when you factor race into the equation, it's not actually 13 for 60. It's actually more or less 5 or 6 for 60. You gotta remember, it's only the men who are being prosecuted and sent to prison for crimes that they commit. As such, it's only black men who are facing the full brunt of social injustice in the criminal justice system. There's substantial evidence to suggest that white men are actually more likely to be the victim of police brutality than black women, at that. The only notable female victim of police brutality I can think of off the top of my head is Breonna Taylor. But I know who Duncan Lemp is, and I do know who Daniel Shaver is, and I do know what happened at Ruby Ridge. Yeah, that little aspect kind of debunks the whole intersectionality thing, doesn't it? And keep in mind, so far, we've only talked about how the draft only affects men and how men are the ones suffering most from the biased criminal justice system. We haven't even touched on the state monopoly of child support. Every time I bring up the child support system to many libertarians, they try to defend a state monopoly by saying we need a way to hold deadbeats accountable, despite the fact the word deadbeat is not mentioned anywhere in Title 4D of the U.S. Social Security Act. Instead, what is mentioned is the word non-custodial, meaning literally anyone who doesn't have custody of their children. And each state has its own form of child support, and the federal government offers these states aid for every dollar a non-custodial parent pays into the system. States are literally profiting by alienating good fathers and good mothers, but that doesn't happen very often compared to fathers. And this is because, to this day, men are still the primary financial providers in a relationship. This is not some system in place. This is women refusing to date men who make less than them. And while the gap is closing, that's still a pretty dang big gap if you ask me. There is no system forcing women to hold men to these traditional gender roles. Women are doing this by choice, on their own free will. Men have absolutely no control over the standards that women are holding us to. And I know someone's gonna say it, stop typing. It doesn't matter that men leave a relationship once they have been replaced as the primary financial provider. When men already entered the relationship making less than their wife or girlfriend, the relationships tend to last longer. And when you actually look into the statistic, once men have been replaced as the financial provider, women are just as likely to leave him as he is to leave her. So because women are still holding men to the burden of being the financial provider in a relationship, despite the fact that y'all have the same opportunity to go out and work and provide for yourselves, the states are more willing to alienate a father for profit than a mother by a wide margin. And this position on child support is something that most libertarians don't even want to discuss for some reason. This is why Kalina George, aka That Liberty Chick, and I are no longer friends. We were the two biggest influencers from the Louisiana Libertarian Party, so we got to know each other pretty well. But one thing we did not agree on was child support. I believe the state's role in child support should be minimal, if at all. And more importantly, I don't think a registered nurse who is also a certified personal trainer with a successful platform should be entitled to child support because you're clearly capable of providing for yourself and do not actually need it. And look, I'm not saying child support shouldn't exist. I'm saying it should be privatized and we should break up the state monopoly on the system that is Title 4D of the U.S. Social Security Act. The state should not be able to force anyone to pay child support or alienate them from their kids unless they have been proven to be abusive or negligent. And yet so many libertarians still give me pushback on this subject because they don't understand that the child support system as is a state monopoly. The majority of government institutions and systems in place do not disparage women at all, but men. And when I bring these examples up, whether it's child support, divorce, the prison population, or the draft, the first thing women tell me is, that's the patriarchy. It benefits you more than anyone. How is it a patriarchy? The only thing you could make an argument for is abortion rights, but that's only a problem in 13 out of 50 states, whereas all 50 states have some kind of child support system that is disparagingly affecting men and fathers. All states are disproportionately more likely to charge and convict a man for a crime they did not commit. And it doesn't matter where you live in the United States as a male. When you turn 18, you have to register for the Selective Service. These institutions are not disparaging women. They are disparaging men at much higher rates. So why do feminists insist that the patriarchy exists to this day? Because the whole reason feminism exists was to smash the patriarchy. And without the patriarchy, feminism loses its relevance. So now modern feminists are constantly moving the goalposts on what makes something a patriarchy, so that they can keep fighting an invisible dragon and pretending like they're still relevant in 2023 when they're not. The patriarchy is dead, and so is feminism.